Welcome to Point to Rise, your podcast that gives you permission to dream big, take messy action, and turn your talent into profit while turning your back on perfection. My name is Suzanne Purcell, high performance and mindset coach, former international ballerina, profitable entrepreneur, and founder of Point to Rise, a movement designed to empower dancers. It is my mission to use my own story as an inspiration for today's generation of dancers. And now sit back, stretch, warm up, or sip your coffee and love learning how much it matters to point at yourself first to rise to all that you are capable of. Hello and welcome back to the show. I'm so grateful that you tuned back in. Our guest today is Arianna Shimits from Persistent Psych. Now, her and I, as per usual, and I love technology for that one particular reason through Instagram and just love what she does. I love her courage and her persistency and her curiosity and her, I would say, real commitment to learning and helping the industry. Now, let me tell you a little bit about her. Arianna is the co-founder of Persistent Psych, and she is currently a PSYD candidate at the Springfield College. She completed her master's degree in sports and performance psychology at the University of Denver and her bachelor's degree in psychology at the New College of Interdisciplinary Arts and Science at Arizona State University. While working towards her BA and MA, she danced professionally at the Washington Ballet, Ballet Arizona, and the Colorado Ballet. She performed soloist and quarter ballet roles in ballets choreographed by Petipat, Balanchine, Thorpe, Jorg, and Stevenson. After retiring from ballet, Arianna pursued an MA in sports and performance psychology, believing that the performing arts could benefit from the skills and training offered by SPP. Additionally, Arianna is pursuing her PSYD in counseling psychology so that she can provide well-rounded care for performers who are experiencing mental health concerns. Throughout her graduate school education, she has worked with dancers, musicians, runners, basketball players, soccer players, cyclists, surgeons, first responders, and adults with eating disorders. She is passionate about helping people perform at their very best and believes that implementing rigorous physical training with SPP will help performers of all ages achieve exactly that. So without no further ado, here is our conversation. Welcome to the show, Arianna. I am so happy to have this conversation with you today. I am super grateful that we've met. And and I said it in the beginning already, but what really stood out for me is your ability to take fast actions without questioning them, and then also following through. Don't often find that quality in people. So I just wanted to shout that out, just so you all know.
Thank you so much. And thank you again for inviting me to be a part of this. I think the work that you're doing to help artists is wonderful. And that's the same mission that I have. So I'm excited to chat about that today.
Okay, wonderful. Well, before we do that, I'd like to ask a few warm-up questions. However, they can be perceived as hard to answer as well. But let's start. What would you identify as your superpowers?
My superpowers. Oh, that's a really, really hard question. I think one of my superpowers would be my passion for what I do. I think of myself as a super passionate person. And I don't think I know a whole lot about everything, but if I'm interested in something, I always feel really passionate and committed to learning as much as I can. So I would say that's a huge one, my passion. And then, oh, this is a hard one. My gosh. I think another joy of mine is storytelling and using narrative for change. I think that can be such a powerful tool, and it's something that I try to incorporate into my work as well.
Yeah. P.S. Check out her Instagram. She tells great stories. And these are superpowers. And I think I want to add there that I think you're also very courageous. And that is a superpower. Definitely, in my opinion. Okay. Sports, and this is really hard for a German girl to say, sports psychology.
Uh-huh.
What is that? Like, if you can like water it down and explain it to somebody that really truly has no idea, it's like me talking about Web3 and crypto to you, water
Right.
it down. What is that?
Yeah. So, sport and performance psychology is a field of psychology that focuses on helping people become the best versions of themselves. So, I think, the word psychology has a lot of stigma around it, and immediately people think mental health or psychopathology. But sport and performance psychology is a small area of the bigger field of psychology that helps athletes just like dancers or musicians, or we work with high performers or people in high risk occupations to be the best versions of themselves, especially under high pressure situations. And the way that I explain this to a lot of the performers that I work with is there are so many different challenges that arise when you're, an elite performer in your field. And what we do as sport and performance psychology professionals is we try to help alleviate some of those challenges or to try to help you develop tools to better cope with those challenges in the future. So I would say it's pretty similar to, going to a counselor. But again, this is more specific to sport and performance, and we focus less on someone's history and more on action steps that can help them in the future. So it's more action oriented.
Beautiful. Thank you. Now you said elite performers in their field.
Hmm.
How am I'm thinking, if you're not watching this on YouTube, I'm really thinking out loud on how I can phrase this question without being rude. When we talk about elite performers, I
Yeah,
personally think that we all can be elite performers if we choose to be. Okay.
absolutely.
What are the things that we're struggling with? What is it that you often see that is in need of support for these people that you're helping?
Yeah, great question. And to kind of clarify, I think I think everyone can be an elite performer as well. Again, you can be the best version of yourself, and that's not always going to be as good as the best version of someone beside you. But again, helping become people become the best version of themselves. So, I think pretty much anyone on this earth is a performer, right? There are performers who are performing artists. There are performers who are athletes. There are performers who are students. There are performers who are business executives, right? And there's so much similarity in all of those different fields. And you know, the most common problems that we see or we have people come to us for are pretty similar across the board, but then when you really get into the weeds, they start to differ. But I would say along the performance issues, we see things like performance anxiety, a lack of motivation in what they're doing. Burnout has been a really huge one. The three of those are probably the most common. And then when working with younger athletes or performers, there is a lot of work around confidence and athletic identity and figuring out who they are inside of their craft and also outside of that.
Burnout, motivation, and performance anxiety. Now, I understand where the first and the latter come from.
Mhm.
I don't, can we go a little bit into motivation? Because
Sure.
when people don't have motivation, they don't know their why. In my very limited knowledge, help me understand.
Yeah. So it's a fascinating topic and something that we think a lot about in this field. And, you know, motivation, the way that we think about it in sports psych is it's an emotion, right? You can either feel really motivated when you wake up or you cannot feel motivated when you wake up. And we really don't try to build motivation. What we try to do is we try to build commitment to your craft, commitment to your why, as you mentioned earlier, because that's so much more sustainable. And again, we know our emotions ebb and flow throughout the day, depending on what's going on in our life. But what we try to have performers develop is commitment and committed action so that regardless of how they feel, they're going to push towards that why, even if there are challenges and obstacles in the way.
And I could see that that could become something that, is can be a challenge too, because sometimes we can't push or we shouldn't push, or the reason that we are in burnout is because we have pushed too much. So how do you decide when is the right time to push and when do we need to take our foot off the gas?
Yeah. So the answer that we give a lot in psychology and sports psych in general is it depends, right? And every athlete and every performer is going to be so different. So I think there is a huge level of self-awareness that we try to foster in our work with athletes and performers because we're not going to know as, a consultant working with someone whether it is the time for them to push or not. We can help them explore their situation and help them explore the emotions that they're feeling about something. But really, what we're doing is we're helping to foster awareness so that they're able to make those decisions while we're in session or in the future. Because, again, as you know, burnout is a huge part of performance, and overtraining is a big part of performance as well. And starting to figure out, okay, what is my threshold? And how can I kind of work underneath that and push myself to do good work without having, the side effects of burnout is a really huge thing. But that was a really long winded way to answer that. And I think the best way that we can start to work on it is through awareness.
Hmm. Awareness. It is something that is not, in my personal opinion, put enough emphasis on at all. And you and I have been trained as dancers, and I have never, ever heard the word awareness come into our training at all. Even though I was trained in the 80s and 90s, you were trained 20 years later. It still is not something we have talked about. Why do you think is that?
I think, in the world of dance, especially the world of classical ballet, there's just been a way that things have been done. There's a lot based on tradition, and even though we have sport research and sport science to look at the importance of awareness, I think it just hasn't been done yet. And I often think about, okay, how can we start to bring awareness into the studio? And I think that's something we need to start doing at a younger age, and that's by having teachers who are aware of what that means. And, not only being aware of what your physical body is doing, but also about what your mental state is. And I think that second part is something we don't often think about, right? We constantly as dancers think about how we're feeling physically, right? You walk into a studio, you notice, okay, is there soreness in my back or my calves or my feet? And you check in with yourself, and then you have action steps that you might take to alleviate some of those stressors, right? Rolling out, icing, taking ibuprofen, doing what you need to do. But we don't do that on the mental side. And I think that's something that needs to come into our training and also just kind of needs to be normalized in conversations like we're having right now. That it's important to also check in with ourselves on more of the psychological and mental side of things.
Mm. And I would add to this that I feel that dancers particularly, actually most artists live in kind of a not kind of, but they live in a reactive state. So hence the lack of awareness, right? If you were more aware of how you're feeling, or why you're feeling that way, and how can I change that in this very moment, I would predict that we would see less injuries, we would see less mental breakdowns, we would see less burnout, and all because we're not fostering self-care and self-love at all. It is more self-hate, work against yourself, your body's lazy, you got to. break through this, your mind is weak, whatever the phrase or the story is that has been implanted in your subconscious is the reason why so many artists think and assume and live suffering is what will get me the result of success.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a big reason for that is this need or this want to be perfect, which we know doesn't exist. But I think because of that, and I found this a lot in my experience as a dancer, as a pre professional, and as a professional, that I was so focused on being perfect, I didn't think about the things that could have gone wrong. And that was really bad because once those challenges and obstacles did arise, I didn't think about how I was going to handle them, not just physically, but psychologically and mentally. And
Mm.
again, it goes back into the checking in with yourself and not working off ego, but working off, task focus and being aware of what you're doing. And I think a lot of the times that perfectionism kind of drives us, but it's really in some ways kind of a negative thing because we're not thinking about all of the unproductive things that are going to happen to us and how we could cope with them in real time.
Hard question to answer, maybe, I imagine.
I'm ready.
All right. So I'm in a very giggly mood today, so it's just going to be this. When a performer, for example, has decided, okay, I want to do it differently. I want to have a different career. I'm choosing to get help, ask better questions, take care of myself. And they are stepping into environment where that kind of thinking, behaving, and acting isn't fostered, but questioned and maybe also punished. What kind of advice would you give them?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really great question because immediately my mind went into a dance studio, right? Where if I'm working with someone and we're, talking about ways that they can have a better mindset in the studio and we come up with a contingency plan for when things go wrong and we put a lot of work into this. If they're then taking all those skills into an environment that does not really support those behaviors, how well is it going to work? And my argument for that is it's always better than nothing, right? And figuring out how you think and the way that you respond to things is never going to be a bad thing. I hope in the future that there is a huge culture change in dance and that those skills and those tools are started to start to be incorporated into training and into the culture. But until then, I never think it's going to be a bad thing to know more about the way that you think and the way that you process things and go into a difficult environment and try to utilize them to the best of your ability. And again, it's not something that's common in dance to utilize things like sport and performance psychology. So, to the dancers I work with, I always say, you know what, you're going to have one leg up because you've thought about things, you've processed them, you have tools in your toolbox. And even if the environment's not completely conducive to that, you still are, again, one step ahead of the rest.
Yeah. And I want to add here that you're also giving other people permission to really act in that capacity as well and go get some help and go reach out to other resources and tap into things that knowledge, medicine, anything processes people that perhaps tradition in this world has kept us from.
Right.
So it's not only for you that you're stepping up, you're also giving others the permission to do the same. So how one light lights another, and then it is the theory of compound interest that the more and more people do it, the faster the fire will really ignite. And I have heard quite a few people demanding that, direction has to change, and it needs to be the directors and it needs to be the teachers that are, implementing the change. And I'm like, well, that's where it starts. If you're not willing to change yourself, then no matter what and who around you is going to change, you will not be able to adapt because
Right.
change comes from every single corner.
Absolutely. And, when you were saying that, I immediately thought of of an example of this, right? Where even in a really competitive setting, one person can change the culture of that class. It's something that I've talked about with athletes and performers before, and saying that if you're in a class and someone's doing something really well, imagine how much you would change the environment if you went up and you said, "Hey, that was really great for XYZ reasons," right? You just changed that really competitive environment to one that's really supportive by one small gesture. And there are so many steps that we can take along the way to really change things from the inside out. So I agree, it really is a call to action, not only for the stakeholders and executives and artistic directors, but it's of huge importance that the dancers stand up for what they need, and to try to normalize that support's okay, and that utilizing science and research is okay, and all of those things. So absolutely, I think change needs to come from all sides.
hmm And, in organizations, and if you listen to Simon Sinek, like leadership is not a title. It's, how does he say it? Leadership isn't a title. Leadership is a privilege. And leadership isn't something that comes from the top down. Leadership is something that comes from within. And that is a actual leader's responsibility to foster those leaders that are sitting in organizations. Now, when we're talking about business and we think that, okay, that works in business. No, it also works in every other aspect in our lives. It works in families, it works in small offices or small businesses, and it works in arts organizations as well. And I believe that performing artists have been pushed into this belief and corner and box of thinking that they're the victim of, or they are at the whim of somebody else, that they decide over their success or not, that there's luck involved, that you know it's all up to somebody else to make this happen for me. And I challenge that. We challenge that, because it is up to you and to you only on what you want to go and get it. And if that means to ask better questions, different questions, to ruff some feathers, if that means to, do things differently, if you want different, you also have to do different. And you cannot wait for somebody else to just hand it to you, the different. You got to implement that yourself. I got lost in my thought. However, I'd appreciate if you catch me here.
Absolutely. I hear what you're saying, and I couldn't agree more. And it's kind of one of those things where I look back on my career and I think, if I only knew what I know now then, because I would have pushed to advocate for dancers and what they need for resources. And I think you're right. It needs to be a voice that comes from within the company or the school or the organization. And it's important for dancers to advocate for themselves. Even if it feels scary, there are so many people who would stand behind them, whether that is the company's supporters or their donors or the dance community as a whole. And we have so many different avenues to do that now, whether it's social media or, reaching out to the community. There's so many ways to do it. And it's important, although it is scary, but I think a lot of change could come from that.
And fast too, right? I
Absolutely.
I talked about this earlier. I heard it. Gary Vaynerchuk, he holds a big conference every single year. It's called BCon, and he had a guest speaker on there, and I just caught the very glimpse and very powerful saying, like, stop fearing the power of the few and start understanding how powerful the masses actually are when they collaborate and really combine their power. Now, you have to understand first that power isn't something bad.
Right.
Power is something great that we possess to change the world, or us or somebody or our environment for the better. It's not something to, hurt somebody else or make them feel less than. I think that that particular statement would, can really signify what the performing arts world altogether could really be, yeah, capable of, you know? Yeah.
Right. If you're especially if you're talking about the whole performing arts community as a whole, I mean, that's a lot of artists. That's a lot of supporters. There are so many people who could come together and advocate for change at that level. And to, I think it's one of those difficult things where the tradition and culture is so important and no one's trying to remove that. We're just trying to upgrade it. We're trying to modernize it.
Yeah.
And I think that that change is very possible.
So why do you think are we so fixated on traditions?
Mm. That's a really good question that I wish I had a better answer for. And I think it's just one of those things where our art form has been modern and we've almost always had the mentality of, well, it's always been done this way and people have been getting better. So why change it? And I think that's a flawed argument in a lot of ways because of course we're going to get better, right? It's been decades and decades and decades and we're going to get better naturally, but why not get even better than that, right? If we were to integrate all of the research that's been done, and I think being a provider on the other side of things and no longer a dancer in the studio, I find that that's my biggest frustration, because I'm engaging in dance research and there's also so much of it. And it's kind of frustrating because there's all this great stuff out there, but nothing's really happening in the studio. So we have all this research to say X, Y, and Z, yet no change has happened on a really big scale. And that's not to say change hasn't happened. There have been a lot of really wonderful things, integrating sports medicine into a company setting, but there could be more that's done. And, I think trying to take the research and turning it into applied work is the next really important step.
Two questions.
Mhm,
Why do you think companies are not implementing A, the research and the resources?
mhm,
And B, what would your ideal performing arts company look like and offer?
mhm. Yeah, so I think there are a lot of barriers to entry. I think the biggest one is cost. As we know, big ballet organizations at any level don't have a lot of extra funds. They are pretty underfunded. So I would say that that's one of the biggest barriers to entry. And then the second one that I'll mention is I think it's a cultural barrier in that it's not something that's widely accepted yet. I think in some companies they are integrating more research, but it's not something we hear about every day in the media. It's not something that is regularly talked about. So I think that's another issue. And there are so many other barriers to entry other than those two, but I feel like those really take the cake and make the big difference for why people can't come in and try to offer different resources or potentially research.
I want to put one remark in there. When you said the barrier of entry is financial, we're choosing that. We're choosing it actively because there is not many people out there yet that are asking better questions. Meaning, it's not, it's not, it does not have to be a matter of finances to look after your product. This is an active choice because you are not seeing the worth of your dancers, of your artists, of your musicians, of your actors, and whoever else you're serving. A real true leader looks after their people and doesn't push them down. So when the barrier of entry financial is, that barrier could be taken down yesterday. And whoever wants to challenge me on that, DM me. I have a lot to say about that. This is such an active victimhood choice. And I hear what you're saying. I have heard around this over and over and over again. It gets me fired up because again, are you choosing I- are you standing on the street and like putting your hands up and say, well, can't raise any more money this year, so what we're gonna do? Or are you going to go and find another solution? Because there are other solutions. The reason why you're not seeing them is because you're fixating on a problem and not on a solution. Oh, let's turn this into something positive. Let's play brilliant ID time. What
Sure.
what would a great organization in your dream world look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think there's two ways that this could work. And one would be to have an embedded sport and performance psychology team in an organization. And then the other one would be to have a team in which a company consults with. And in my dream world, this would look like is starting off a season, probably in the off season with doing different assessments to start doing research, right? What are people struggling with? What is common amongst this population? Just trying to gather as much data as possible while also doing mental health screeners so that we know who's at risk for certain issues or things, as the season comes along. And I think that data is really important. After that, I think doing workshops on psychological skills training could be huge, right? Working with small groups of dancers to give them tools to be better in the season, to recover faster, to feel more confident on stage, to really kind of fall back in love with their craft. And then aside from that, working one on one with each artist, maybe that's only 30 minutes a week or an hour a week, but really trying to set goals for them, not only in their physical performance, but also psychologically. What do they want to achieve? And how can we help them get there? And checking in on that throughout a whole season. In addition to that, I think there's a lot around injury prevention that could be done in ways of prevention, but also maintenance and support once a dancer is injured or is coping with an injury to help them, get back to the stage quicker and feel stronger about that. There's also a lot of work around career transition that could be done for dancers stepping away from the stage and going into academia or another field. And then, of course, I think offering things like performance support. So being around backstage so that if it is a dancer's first time or their debut in something they're not comfortable with, being there as a support, giving those brief interventions so that they're able to perform at that high level. So I think there's so many different ways that this could look, but I would say assessments need to be done, a formal needs assessment for that organization. Then there needs to be education around all of the different things and challenges that happen on more of the psychological side. And then, normalized and regular support one on one with performers could be a really effective strategy. And that's, if someone was embedded in the organization. So, again, just being around for any of the things that happen throughout the day. As you know, there are so many of those moments. And then the only thing that I conceptualize potentially being better is being slightly removed from the organization. And this is kind of the second option. So, not completely embedded in the organization, but working as a consultant would be that dancers may feel or artists might feel more comfortable working with someone who's not directly integrated into the organization, even though it is my ethical and legal responsibility as a sport and performance psychology consultant to keep confidentiality. I think there is still some fear that if I was working with an organization, that level of confidentiality wouldn't be there, which
Or
isn't
you
the
would do
case.
your job.
Right.
Right. Yeah. So
Which again isn't the case, but I think there is some fear associated with being vulnerable to someone who's within an organization. So I think there's several ways to do it and many things that could be done either in an embedded setting and an outside kind of consultant role.
do I wonder if
Mm.
anybody ever has done the math yet? Meaning, why don't you and I look at this right now? Again, brilliant ID time. So let's say we were running an organization and we're looking and bringing in a consultant firm in the beginning just to test things out. Let's say what am I, tell me if I'm off base, maybe 20, 30,000 a month. Would that cover like consulting on a Like, let's say we have like 30, 40 dancers. Would that be enough or should we add another 10,000?
I think absolutely that would be fine in a smaller company with 1 or 2 consultants that you were working with, probably. That would be, yeah, absolutely feasible for that type of work.
So let's say 30,000 a month you would be adding to your overhead. So for a whole year, that's 360,000. I'm sorry, that's nothing in my opinion. And I would even go as far as saying, okay, what could that investment have as a return? A,
Mhm.
well, it would mean maybe your artist wouldn't get sick so often and you wouldn't have to pay out insurance. Maybe your insurance would actually go down. What else?
Think
Well,
rate of injury,
rate of injury.
turnover, with
True.
dancers leaving companies, potentially using this type of programming to even advertise, to bring in more donors, to bring in people who are going to buy tickets because they're probably going to like seeing that. Hey, you're taking care of your dancers, you're investing in them. So I think, rate of injury again, rate of sickness or leave, turnover of athletes and performers, ticket sales, bringing donors in. I think that there's a lot there. On the other side of it, I think there's also a lot of opportunity for grants and grant rating. If, you know,
Right.
a company was to engage in research, there are grants that they could apply for that could fund a program like that. So I think there are a lot of options. And I hope either to be part of a study like that can lay out, okay, this is 1 year without this type of program, this is 1 year with this type of program. What was the cost benefit to you? What happened with the dancers? What happened with them in the company? And I think it could be a really fascinating way to prove that this type of investment is pretty imperative.
So good. And I think when we're talking about maybe higher ticket sales, that's because the dancers are performing on a higher level, meaning
Sure.
not I'm not talking skills, I'm talking emotional. That's what really is going to attract more people because they're going to sit there and they're going to be completely involved and enthralled on what is happening on the stage and feeling themselves, integrated in what is actually happening and not just sitting on the sidelines. So let's just say $360,000 a year is a worthwhile investment. I am certain that when you ask the right people and the right questions, is a piece of cake to find if you're willing to. Because it's not about the money, it's about the willingness. And that's where I get fired up and a little bit upset as well, because I question if leaders in these environments really truly have the very best interest of their artists at heart. Or is it about their ego and then they finally have a seat in what they wanted for so long and their perceived taking of power and control?
Right. And I would argue that it wouldn't even be that expensive. I mean, that would be the ideal situation where you're doing a ton of research. You have a whole team of people, and that would be quite extensive. But I would say that even integrating one part of that ideal situation is a super cost effective way to start to change the culture. That wouldn't be much, I mean, we're talking about potentially ten to $20,000 a year to do one or two of those things, which is a very minimal investment when you're thinking about resources for your dancers and investing in your dancers. So I agree with you. I think it is a frustrating barrier to entry at this point, and I hope that companies start to realize that they can be the face of change. They can be the person who sets the example. They can be the person who fosters dancers to become the best versions of themselves, which also leads to increased performance. So I definitely hear you on that. And I'm just as fired up about it and just as passionate about making change in that regard.
I I don't know why. Well, I think we know why people are hesitant, or because it hasn't been done yet, or because it is uncomfortable, or it's something that we haven't done before. What upsets me is that the industry leaders are still okay with the thought process and the perpetration. Oh my gosh, this is a hard word. The
It is.
continuous, the continuing of the abuse of the artist. That is a rite of passage that people need to hurt. They need to, oh gosh, we need to break their egos down, or we need to break them down to build them back up. That philosophy is no longer something that needs to be followed, yet we're choosing it. And it's because the leaders are not doing their part either. They're not going through the healing. They're not asking better questions. They're not gaining more awareness. And that is where I see so much opportunity that, we really, yes, we're the ones that stepped out of that industry, and we started working on ourselves, and we see the opportunities. And yet we're called, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? You're never going to succeed. And I'm like, you know what? Just watch us. Look at Netflix. Let's take Netflix as an example.
Mhm.
In 2002, I think, or 2000, when they had their meeting with Blockbuster CEO to see if he would buy them, and they could just, form one big CD mailing out company for $50 million. He said no. And 10 years later, he had to file bankruptcy.
Right.
It's because he did not see the potential, and he did not look forward. He just saw what's right in front of him, and that cost him his legacy. And I'm not saying that that is going to be the case here, but what I'm saying is that we can get stuck on everything that is right now and that potentially has worked for the past 3 decades. But if we don't evolve, if we don't start getting more curious and give possibilities for other people or people in the arts to actually be open to learning and fostering the process of learning, we're going to lose touch with the people that are wanting to consume arts. And that may not happen 10 years from now or 20 years from now. But by the rate that we're going, I'm seeing that in 30 years, people are not going to come to the theater anymore. And you have to find another way on how to get an income, because 100% fully funded company, I don't see that. That's not how important the arts are.
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. And it is one of those things that's hard to think about because, again, I am so passionate about my career when I was a dancer. I'm so passionate about the arts in general. And you know, I can't think of how much more, I want this field to flourish. And I think you're right. If we don't try to modernize what we're doing, we're going to be very out of touch, from generations that are up and coming. So I hear you on that. And I think we definitely need to modernize and figure out a better way to make this accessible for everyone, so that there are more people coming to theaters and figuring out how we can do that, whether it's changing the platform that we're using or investing in the artists more. There are just so many things that need to be modernized.
Last question, my love. Well, last question. It's never a last question.
Sure.
If you could go back to your 16-year-old self, and let's just assume she's going to sit down and actually listen to your
Yeah.
version today, what would you tell her?
Hmm. So many things. So many things. But I think a big thing that I keep thinking about is I wish I had invested in myself more. I think there was this mentality of I need to do this and I need to do it myself. You know, for me to become a dancer, I need to put in the hours, I need to do X, Y, and Z. And it would have been so beneficial for me to reach out and say, hey, I need help with this. I need help with this. Maybe I need coaching. Maybe I need therapy. Maybe I need X, Y, and Z. And I think that would have made a really big difference on the way that I presented myself as a dancer and as a person. And so I would say that. I would say to reach out for more help and realize that you don't have to do this on your own. You can, but you don't have to.
I think we personally, the two of us, could make an entire podcast episode on
Mhm.
what we learned around asking for help.
Absolutely.
I can so relate to her. So asking for help is also a superpower.
Yeah.
I'm gonna claim that now. The
Mhm.
ability, the mindset to ask for help, to feel worthy enough and enough to
Yeah,
ask for help. Yeah. Okay.
absolutely.
Ariana, how can people work with you? Where can they find you? What programs are you offering right now that when people, high performers, elite performers, are open to searching for help, like where can they find you?
Yeah, great question. So I have a private practice called Persistent Psych, and you can go on to persistentpsych.com and there's a contact me button there that you can utilize. Or if you search my bio, which is also on the website, my individual emails right there. And currently, we are doing both remote and in person sessions with individual performers. So, normally, what that looks like is 15 minutes over Zoom or in person where we work with a performer on their needs and create goals and, values for what they see themselves trying to achieve in the future, and we kind of go from there. Everything that we do is utilizing sport and performance psychology and all of the different interventions and knowledge and resources that we have through that. So feel free to check us out on our website. Also, we are on Instagram at Persistence Psych.
Beautiful. Again, I would like to add something that just came out when you were speaking. I believe that there is something to a great education and learning psychology and knowing where everything is coming from, how we can, moderate and structure our life. And then there is life experience. And when you
Yeah.
have both in one pocket, you're unstoppable and you want to tap into that. I actually prefer life experience over, education because let's say in marketing and sales and business, everything changes so much that if you
Yeah.
were to get a master's or whatever in business or marketing right now, by the time you're done, everything you learned doesn't apply anymore. Mm, It is, that's how fast we're moving, right? Like
Yeah.
even when you look at technology, you get your master in, I don't know, UI or UX.
Mhm.
But the year that you're done, you won't be able, it won't be relevant anymore. So what I'm saying is that working with people that have been in the field and took the time to educate themselves professionally, I personally see as a perfect fit to really assist and help because, and I don't know if you agree with me, you can disagree. There's so much that research can really bring into, one's ability to teach, and then there's
Mhm.
life. And sometimes that perhaps doesn't align
Mhm.
and you can offer both. So what it really was a pitch for you to go work with you.
Well, no,
No, no.
I appreciate that. And I think about that quite frequently in that it's so important to, especially obviously in the world of psychology, to be working with someone who's educated in what you're trying to do. And then also, I think absolutely having that life experience. And, it's a mission that or a goal that I always put on myself is to always be asking questions, to always be learning about the populations that I'm working with, because the more that I know about a performer and their culture, the more I'm going to be able to help. So I think both of those points are so important, especially in this field, to have that solid education in the field of study, and then also to be constantly pursuing opportunities that help you stay involved with the culture and community.
Beautiful. Well, on that note,
Y'all, thank you so much for listening. We appreciate you being here. We are encouraging you to share your biggest takeaway, whatever that was, if you agree, or even if there's something that we said today that you don't agree. Shout us out, let us know, send us a smoke signal. Either way, we will get back to you. You can tag Arianna at Persistent Psych on Instagram or myself at Point to Rise or underscore Suzanne Prochelle. Yeah, that's it. We're sending you so much love. Thank you for tuning in, guys.
Thank you so much for listening. If this message resonates with you, please pass it on to someone who needs to hear this right now. And if you like what you've heard, your feedback will go a very long way. If you just take 30 seconds and leave me a 5-star review, that would mean the world to me. Till next time, point at yourself to rise to all that you are capable of.